Hello? Good evening. Vanakkam. Welcome to the fifth lecture in the Varahamira Science Forum series, a special program for the Tamil Heritage Trust series. For some of you, this may be the first time you are coming to Tamil Virtual Academy, so there's like 3 organizations kind of overlapping hosting it, and I'll give a brief intro to all 3 of them before I give an introduction to the speaker. Tamil Virtual Academy is oldest of the lot. It's run by it's a division of the government of Tamil Nadu IT division. They are effectively a precursor to the kind of open universities that you're seeing, open courses that you're seeing today. தமிழ் கல்வி திட்டத்துக்கு பல இணையதளத்தில் வந்து அவங்க நிறைய வீடியோ எல்லாம் பண்ணுறாங்க. அவங்க வெப்சைட் வச்சுருக்காங்க, tamilvu.org அப்படிங்கிற இடத்துல. நீங்கள் யூ கேன் கோ சி லாட் ஆஃப் தேர் வீடியோஸ். தேர் ஆர் இன்ஸ்ட்ரக்ஷன்ஸ் ஃபார் தேர் லிட்ரேச்சர், for Tamil heritage, culture, government related programs, history, all kinds of stuff is there. All kinds of information. They also last couple of years வந்து தகவல் ஆற்றுப்படைன்னு ஒரு சீரீஸில் ஒரு லெக்சர் சீரீஸும் நடத்திட்டு இருக்காங்க. Tamil Heritage Trust is a independent non-profit organization. What we do is we host a bunch of different programs. One is the monthly series, which we have usually on the first Saturday of every month. Second is what you're seeing on the screen, what's called the Pechu Kacheri, and we had that last week here. The last Saturday and Sunday we had that here. Pechu Kacheri is complementary to the Patu Kacheri of Margadi, and Natya Kacheri of Margadi, where we have a lectures spread across 2 days on a particular topic. This recent one was about the city of Kanchipuram and its heritage. And we had 5 or 6 series. This was the 6th of that series, the one that we had last week. Besides that, we have something called site seminars we do every January, and we are going this January to Kanchipuram again as a heritage site, and that's kind of fully booked, but that's one of the programs. We are seeing some of the photos from some of the sites that we went to. And of course, we have the monthly lecture series, some of the videos of which you're seeing. And the heritage series, most of the programs tend to be history, art, sculpture, literature, linguistics, things like that, even poetry, dance, and so on. But we also occasionally host science-related lectures. That's not often enough in our, perhaps not often enough. So we some of us decided to start a new forum called the Varahamihira Science Forum, because we had a WhatsApp group going. Literally, that's how it started. We had a WhatsApp group going for the science lectures series because some of us met at a couple of science lectures, and then no science lecture happened at all for months together, or nothing that we knew about. So we thought this is kind of ridiculous. So we should actually have one. Let me quit this. How do I do that? And go to this thing. So we started this Varahamira Science Forum to host popular lectures in the city of Madras, in city of Chennai, and we have a history of this, and we'll come to that. So we celebrate Madras as the cultural capital of India, at least the Madrasis do. We've just got the labeled as the creative city tag that the UNESCO has given us. But isn't science part of our culture? We tend to kind of abandon it and say, okay, the West did all of it, and which is entirely not at all true. And to promote scientific lectures, and in fact, it's very apt to have this topic today, because he's going to talk about a series of science lectures that led to an institution. We wanted to celebrate science as a part of our culture and take science to a popular audience, not just to technical institutions. We have seminars in IITs and the medical colleges and the engineering institutions, and the government conducts certain science festivals and so on, but we don't necessarily have one for the public. அது பண்ணணும், மக்களுக்கு போனோம், பொதுமக்களுக்கு வந்து விஞ்ஞானத்தை சொல்லணும் அப்படிங்கிற ஒரு ஆசையிலையும் அது ரெகுலராக சொல்லணும். So you'll have a forum to meet and discuss and perhaps form a culture. அதுன்றதுக்கும் அது. So that was the idea for the forum. And we want to build a community using social media, which we have actually done with WhatsApp and Facebook. We have had 4 lectures so far. We have a community of about 100 to 150 people on email and a slightly larger community that's following us across Facebook and YouTube and so on. We just started a YouTube forum, and this is being broadcast live on that forum. And we want to take a little bit away from the very dry narration of facts that involve science and mathematics, and also talk about the story and the romance and the history and the personalities involved, and what led to particular situations evolving, and how some of the maths, we are given perfect solutions or perfect discoveries, and we are not given the flaws or the mistakes or the search and the difficulties that the scientists and the mathematicians went to get there. So we wanted to do that. And the presentation, it's not just substance, but we wanted a style and substance, so it it attracts an audience. So we are hoping for amateur and professional speakers, and Krishnaswamy Alladi is a speaker who's a very good speaker in both the subject, that when he talks about mathematics he speaks very well, and when he talks about the historical personages and the incidents around it also, he can put it across to a not a hardcore mathematical audience also very well. So we are delighted to have him here. So in fact, the first 4 topic speakers, including me, were not professionals in that subject. We are professionals in a different area, and it's a non-profit attempt. So far we have been kind of hunting for a hall and charging just people a nominal amount just to come to the hall to cover the rental of the hall. But this, since TVA is holding it and THT is kind of co-hosting it, we kind of made it a open kind of program. I think we have a registry where somewhere, then we'll take down your names, and if you want to donate to us, that's great. But continuing in the series, we'll have more lectures in the next month, and then continuing onwards. So Tamiliyum பேசணும். In fact, first 2 lecture கொஞ்சம் இங்கிலீஷ்ல பேசி கொஞ்சம் தமிழ்ல கொஞ்சம் கலந்து பேசின உடனே second lecture was given by I'll come to that shortly. நிறைய தமிழ்ல பேசக்கூடியவங்க இருக்காங்க. ஏன்னா இங்கிலீஷ்லயே எல்லாரும் பேசினாலும் some technical words we need to have to, because English has developed a large vocabulary. In fact, most of the vocabulary you talk about in English is either in Latin or Greek. We just think it is English. But that அது ஒன்று இது தமிழ் லெக்சர் பண்ணணும் அப்படிங்கிறதும் ஒரு ஆசை. We wanted to I don't know if he's going to be talking about continued fractions, but we want this thing to be continued into fractions and developed in other places. We want other people to be inspired by our forum and continue expand the forum into different venues, say Velachery or Ambattur or Tambaram or other cities, where they kind of continue these things. Activities and heritage walks are also hoping. In fact, we are hoping to have a astronomy talk soon, and then we'll have a stargazing activity at night and some of that. We actually had a long history of scientific lectures in Madras. It's just very interrupted. There was a Bertrand Russell Society. I happen to know that it's existed, though I have not been able to find any information about it, because this is in my family album. The person in the corner is my dad. So he was part of that, but he never spoke to me about it, and I don't know what the society actually did. So I have to, I'm curious about what this is, and I want to find out more information. But there was a bunch of this thing. So we've had other lectures, but they've been confined to venues. Arvind Gupta, the famous person, gave a wonderful demonstration of several things at IIT. Rakesh Sharma, the astronaut, and he also gave a lecture at IIT. Fields medalist Manjul Bhargava last year gave a lecture at the KSRI about mathematics and Sanskrit. There was a Bhaskaracharya workshop conducted by the KV Sharma Library. CNR Rao gave a lecture, Bharat Ratna CNR Rao gave a lecture on about Lavoisier and Faraday and all the things that led to his discoveries. This was at IIT. Professor Alladi himself gave a lecture last year about Ramanujan and the theatrical productions that led to it at Ekam Srinivas. And he also gave a similar lecture a few days back at MSSRF. Then MatScience has recently started this kind of work. They've done a series of programs the last couple of years at the Academy. The Birla Planetarium hosts, Venus Transit, Mercury Transit. They've held these events. So those have gone well. And Madras is that rare city where you can watch a rocket launch from the rooftop. Literally, that photo is on the left is my rooftop, and I was watching a rocket take off from Sriharikota. The one on the next is the building right next door. The photo is from the Anna library. You go to the 5th floor, you can actually, see that. You should be, the spirit should be infectious, and so that is kind of what we are trying to establish. And there are very few cities where you can boast that you can watch rockets other than the Sivagasi type of rocket take off from your rooftop, right? So, quickly, the last 4 lectures, I started it off with a lecture about Antoine, Lavoisier, and the origin of chemistry. We tend to think of Copernicus as kind of the big transition in terms of science, but Lavoisier's impact was probably just as big in science. but it tends not to be appreciated. Perhaps it was even bigger in the way they impacted our understanding on how much he discovered compared to, say, Copernicus. But we just wanted to introduce people like that. Badri gave a lecture on connecting kind of geometry and biology on single helix, double helix, and triple helix, which has a Madras connection. The single helix is the structure of the protein discovered by Linus Pauling. The double helix, of course, is the famous structure of the DNA discovered by Watson and Crick a decade later. And then in Madras, G. N. Ramachandran, who will probably feature in Mr. Alladi's lecture, discovered the triple helix structure of collagen, and we talked about that. So Badri gave a wonderful lecture on it. It's on our forum, so you can go see it. The next lecture was something that we tend not to know about. Modern medicine really begins in the 1940s, the discovery of antibiotics. But parallelly, there was this work on phages going on to bacteriophages. They were the most effective creatures in the fight against infectious bacteria. And so there's a lecture about that and how that was discovered, and a whole history of this aspect of biology that we tend not to do. He's a regular writer in a lot of Tamil magazines and all that. And last month we had a lecture on Isaac Newton, A Force Awakens. We have a library called the Madras Literary Society Library, which actually has a 1726 copy of Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica. And so Siddharth, one of our engineering students who's kind of enthusiastic about this, gave sort of a overview of the Principia. And a very nice lecture. And we had so good reception on that. So now coming to this, we have Professor Krishnaswamy Alladi. I think I've taken a little longer than I expected. This is the standard irony of some things where the speaker is well known and the introducer is not known and still has to introduce the speaker. I'll just give the formal comments. He comes from a very illustrious family, the family of Alladi Krishnaswamy, whose grandson he is, who was a major member of a leading lawyer of the Madras community and a major contributor to the member of the drafting committee of the Constitution. And then his son Alladi Ramakrishnan, who kind of is the focus of the fulcrum of the talk today, who was a major theoretical physicist who worked with scientists of repute and was instrumental in founding the MatScience and the theoretical seminar series that led to that. And of course, Professor Alladi, Krishnaswamy Alladi, he's just he's a professor of mathematics at the University of Florida. He studied, I think, in Vivekananda College over here. So he's like a Madras graduate from a Madras house talking about a Madras institution. So as Madras as you get. And he's he's just very quickly, I can go into a lot of details about him. That will take an entire lecture to do what he, just to give a proper introduction to him. So I won't do that. But I'll just give a brief sentimental kind of note. Yesterday was Ramanujan's birthday, and he instituted the Ramanujan Prize at Shastra University, and he just gave away that prize yesterday, and he's come back today to give us a lecture. So, and he was telling me about 8-dimensional spheres and how to pack that, and a very interesting conversation on the car over here. So without any further ado, I will hand over the stage to Professor Krishnaswamy Alladi.
Thank you, Gopu, for your kind introduction, and actually for the introductory comments about what your group does. So I'm going to try during my lecture to connect with some of the things that you said, because I was quite impressed with what your organization is doing and the comments you yourself made. It's a pleasure always for me to give a talk in Madras, whether it is a regular mathematics lecture or whether it is a general lecture. And for this particular talk, I want to thank a few people who contacted me and invited me for this. First and foremost is, of course, Gopu, who represents both the Tamil Heritage and the Varahimihira group. My contact with him actually goes back to a talk that I gave under the auspices of the Brains Trust a few years ago on Paul Erdős. And that's when I first met him, and since then we have had interaction during other lectures that I have given in Madras. and also his brother, Mr. Raman, who has been very kind. He was also at my house along with Gopu to invite me, and then Professor Swaminathan of the IIT, who is also founder of the Tamil Heritage Trust, and Mr. Dr. Badri Seshadri. So thank you all for your interest in having me here, and of course all of you who belong to the Tamil Heritage Group and the Varahimihra Group, and thanks also to the Tamil Virtual Academy. So the topic of today's lecture was actually chosen by Gopu, and I'm very happy that it was chosen by Gopu, but it's a topic that is actually dear to my heart, and it's, I think, a topic which is very relevant and important to the city of Madras. I often refer to it as Madras. I hope I'll be pardoned. Chennai, I do say that, but Madras is more natural for me. Because it is the story of the creation of an institute for advanced study, namely MatScience, the Institute of Mathematical Sciences. But the manner in which this institute came into existence is one of the most exciting sagas, not just in Indian science, but in the world of science. And I'm not exaggerating it by saying that, because when I'm going to tell you this story, you will see how incredible this creation has been. So I think it is important that as many citizens of Madras know how exactly this happened. Now, we often hear truth is stranger than fiction, and that is seen explicitly as I'm going to describe the story. All this happened, but an incredible series of events came together in rapid succession to bear fruit. Just before coming to this talk, I was discussing with my dear friend, Mr. G.P. Krishnamurti, how did all this happen within a span of just a few years, and one leading to another, and always some fortuitous circumstance saving my father from a great difficulty, and this happened successively. And so this cannot be actually explained. You can't give any rational explanation for this except that this actually happened, and in the end MatScience was created. So I think I want to share with you this story, but as we are going to go through the story, you're going to also hear episodes of the great makers of modern physics, people like Murray Gell-Mann, Niels Bohr, Donald Glaser, Nobel laureates, as well as great mathematicians like Marshall Stone, all of whom visited Madras and our home, Ekamra Nivas, and therefore it's also going to be very inspiring. So it's not just a story of Alladi Ramakrishnan, it's also going to link him with some of the great personalities of 20th century physics and mathematics. So just to first give a little capsule, so basically what happened was, after my father returned from the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, after spending a year there in 1957-58, when he came back, and at that time he was on the faculty of the Madras University in the physics department, he really wanted to introduce modern physics, quantum mechanics. He felt that the syllabus of the university was outdated, and he wanted to introduce really new topics. But the university was not receptive to his feelings for change, and consequently he decided to conduct a seminar at our home. So I'm going to show you our home here. So this is my grandfather's residence called Ekamra Nivas. It is still there. The residence is in good shape, but the lawn that leads to the residence is no longer there. That part was sold by my uncle, so for whatever reason, but the house stands intact. So he conducted a seminar in the upstairs hall. There's a big hall, and there he started giving lectures on modern physics, and of course the students who gathered around him also contributed to not just listening but also contributed to the lectures. And he invited several eminent scientists to our home. Anybody who was within a 1,000-mile radius was basically roped in to come to Madras and give a talk. He would know so and so is visiting Indian Statistical Institute in Calcutta, he would write and say, you must come to Madras. Or somebody is visiting Tata Institute, you must come to Madras. So all of these people came to Madras to give talks, and many of them actually stayed in our house and met the students and would give these lectures. And one particular individual, Niels Bohr, who came as the guest of Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, visited the theoretical physics seminar and met with the students and was so much impressed with this that at a press conference he made a statement that there were two things that impressed him the most. One was the massive setup of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, how do I change this, in Bombay, and the small group of students trained by Alladi Ramakrishnan in Madras. And this attracted the attention of Jawaharlal Nehru. And at the instance of C. Subramaniam, who was the Minister of Education, Jawaharlal Nehru wanted to meet this group of students. And once he met the group of students and my father sent the proposal, the institute came into existence within 2 months of my father and his students meeting Jawaharlal Nehru. That will never happen nowadays in India or anywhere else in the world. The rapid nature in which this happened also shows how emotional a person Nehru was and how things can happen if you have the goodwill of a great leader. And of course, to conduct the seminar at home and host all these students and to host all these visitors, your wife must cooperate. And my mother not just cooperated, she played a great gracious hostess. So dinners were given to the scientists and not only the scientists but the students, and so she supported my father's effort in every way. So what I'm going to tell you is this magnificent story of how the institute came into existence, but it was not just all milk and honey. There were enormous obstacles all the way through, from the beginning till the creation, opposition from Indian upper administration, scientific administration, and everything was overcome in that short span of time. So that's what is going to be told now. I actually gave this talk for the 50th anniversary of MatScience, the institute that he created. I gave it technically for the 50th anniversary, but it happened to be the 51st anniversary, January 3rd, 2013. And so I'm giving this talk again, but it's going to modify it a little bit so that it's not the identical lecture. So, but before I actually get to the theoretical physics seminar, I need to provide some background so that one understands how this whole thing came into existence. So Gopu has kindly given me an hour, but he also told me that I could go beyond. I'll try not to go beyond, but if I go beyond a little bit, I hope I'll be pardoned. But anyway, we'll not go beyond 5:30, that I assure you. So, as was mentioned by him, my grandfather, Sir Alladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, was one of the greatest lawyers of India. He served on the drafting committee of the Indian Constitution. As is the case in any family, when one member of the family rises to the pinnacle and gets international recognition, or in this case national recognition, he or she becomes a role model for many other family members, and they take to that same profession. Consequently, many members of the Alladi family, not just his children, we're talking about his nephews and other members of the Alladi family, many of them took to law, inspired by Sir Alladi Krishnaswamy Iyer. So it was natural, therefore, for Sir Alladi to encourage his own sons to take to law. So my father was in the BSc honors course of the Presidency College in Madras, and he was doing extremely well in physics. And in 1943, so that's the year I want to start, he heard the lecture of a very brilliant young physicist who had just returned from England and had just received a fellowship of the Royal Society, and this was young Homi Bhabha. So he had, the Physics Association of the Presidency College invited Homi Bhabha to give a lecture, and Homi Bhabha gave a talk on meson theory. And my father was impressed with Bhabha, not only in terms of the contents of the lecture, but just his personality, the charisma, and so on. So he basically said that he fell in love with Bhabha, and this is the kind of It's an academic love to be understood in the proper sense, like when Hardy said that the one romantic incident in his life was his association with Srinivas Ramanujan. So I have said that in editing my father's autobiography. It is in the same spirit my father admired Homi Bhabha. But what actually happened was, after he finished his BSc honor in physics, he actually took to law, encouraged by his father. So he entered law college, and he did extremely well in law, and in fact he was a gold medalist. My father was a gold medalist in Hindu law, just as his elder brother Alladi Kuppuswamy, who became Justice Alladi Kuppuswamy and became Chief Justice of the Andhra High Court, had also won the gold medal in Hindu law. Now, my father has gift of the gab. If any of you have had the opportunity to listen to him, I am nothing compared to the way in which he would speak. I mean, he was an orator par excellence, because he basically mastered Shakespeare, Milton, and all of this. So the words would just come out, and I'm going to read one or two actual phrases of my father from his diary, his memoirs, because that describes certain events much better than I could try and do. So he would have been an extremely successful lawyer, and he did practice for a few years, and he even assisted my grandfather. Now that was also the time when, in 47, we received our independence, and my grandfather was on the drafting committee of the Indian Constitution, and my father actually took dictation from my grandfather for certain things relating to the Constitution. So in a jocular sense, my father said I actually even wrote the Constitution, meaning my grandfather would dictate and my father would write. So many of these things happened in Ekambara Nivas, which incidentally is related to the Constitution of India on the one hand and related to the creation of MatScience on the other. So it's a very historic home. So that was the background. So there was no science involved at that point. Then in 1947, when my grandfather was in Delhi in connection with the Constituent Assembly debates and so on, my father was with him, and my grandfather was invited to meet Homi Bhabha in the presence of Bhatnagar. But my grandfather said, I am not going to attend the dinner today. He looked at my father and said, perhaps you should go to this dinner because it is Homi Bhabha. I have not much to do with Homi Bhabha, but you have always been talking about science. Why don't you go and attend the dinner? So my father actually went to that dinner in place of my grandfather. Look at how fortuitous a circumstance this is. And therefore, he was seated right next to Baba, because that was the seat to be occupied by Sir Alladi Krishnaswamy Iyer. So my father sat right next to Homi Bhabha, and in that conversation, this is one thing about my father, he never missed an opportunity. He always has told me this. Opportunities have to be taken. You can't just wait for an opportunity to come. So he sat next to Baba, and in no uncertain terms, he told Homi Bhabha, I listened to your lecture of 1943 on Meson theory. I instantly fell in love with the mathematics and the physics that you had in that lecture. I would like to be your student. Now here is a person, he just told Baba he would like to be a student, but he is actually assisting my grandfather in law. So Baba was very pleased, because here is a person who actually genuinely wanted to work with him. So he said, why don't you come to Bangalore? And I have a small unit there, and let us meet. So Baba initially had a cosmic ray unit, a small unit at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, which, by the way, to many locals, including your auto rickshaw drivers, is known as Tata Institute. They don't call it Indian Institute of Science. They refer to it as Tata Institute. So if you enter a taxi or an auto rickshaw and say, I want to go there, you say Indian Institute of Science. They don't know what they call it, Tata Institute. So anyway, so my father met Homi Bhabha at in Bangalore, and they started working together. But at that time, starting from 1945, I think, Baba also had a setup in his aunt's home, which is known as Kenilworth in Malabar Hill, and that's where the first premises of the Tata Institute was. And my father says it is about half the size of Ekambara Nivas, in the sense the other half was occupied by Baba's aunt herself. So Baba had a small setup there, and so my father was invited to work with Baba in Bombay. But now has come a situation where he has to eschew a lucrative career in law and take to a career in science. And my grandfather was not very happy about this, because he said, you're going to be a great lawyer, I know that, and we don't know what your future in science is going to be. So at that time, my grandmother, Lady Alladi, came to my father's side and told Sir Alladi, you have made all the money. If your son does not have a big salary, at least he wants to do something worthwhile, I think you should allow him to take to science. So it was my grandmother who convinced my grandfather to allow my father to take to science. So that is why in his memoirs called the Alladi Diary, even though quite a bit is about Sir Alladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, he has actually dedicated it to his mother. Okay. So Baba, my father became Baba's student, and by that time, of course, he had also gotten married. So my mother also spent a little bit of time in Bombay. Now, at that time, Baba was working on a problem relating to cosmic radiation, and that involved the study of probability in cosmic radiation. So he introduced my father to this problem of cosmic radiation, and it involved the study, as I said, of use of probability. So these involved cosmic showers, and that was at that time a very fundamental problem. Even today is a fundamental problem in physics and astrophysics. Now Baba was also mathematically very astute, and my father said he was a master of limiting processes. So he approached the problem from a very rigorous mathematical point of view, but it involved computation of certain limits. My father, of course, had a BSc in physics. He was very good in math, but he was not mathematically trained. But he never did anything incorrect in mathematics. But he had an alternate, simpler approach, which he later termed as product densities. And he showed Baba that this whole thing could be done in a smoother, more elegant way. Now, it's not that Baba did not like it. Baba wanted to confirm the correctness of my father's approach. At that time, in Tata Institute in Kenilworth was a mathematician by name D.D. Kosambi. So Baba consulted Kosambi, and when Kosambi was consulted, he said, this is too simple to be rigorous and correct. And so Baba, following Kosambi's advice, thought that my father had, while the final solution is correct, this is not the approach to take. So what happened was, he decided to write a paper himself. So he never told my father that my father was not going to be an author. My father all along thought that they were going to write a joint paper. So one day, when he was having a casual conversation with the registrar of the Tata Institute, at that time registrar was also personal secretary of Homi Baba, that man said, Baba has given you a handsome acknowledgement in a paper. My father said, what do you mean acknowledgement? I am supposed to be a co-author. So that man showed the paper, and it was just Homi Baba, exactly the same problem, and in the end he said, I thank Alladi Ramakrishnan for discussions. So it was like noon. My father immediately gave a letter of resignation, took the next flight out of Bombay and came to Madras, and he basically said, Bombay life does not suit me, that's all. He didn't say anything else. He came back to Madras, and he told the story to my grandfather. So now here he is at the age of 26, having eschewed a career in law, having taken a pursuit of science, pursuing somebody whom he admired, and now that person whom he admired had completely left him in the lurch. So the only thing was to seek recognition outside India, because nobody in India will ever dare talk about one of the demigods of our profession. Okay, I'm going to say the same thing at the end for my article here, because I've spoken the truth about Homi Baba in this article. So he had to go to England, and Sir S. Radhakrishnan, a great friend, gave a letter so that my father could join Oxford University. But my father had read the notes of a British statistician by name M.S. Bartlett. These lectures were given in North Carolina, and these lectures related to many things that he was doing. So he told my grandfather that he would rather go to the University of Manchester to work with Professor Bartlett because he could appreciate this work immediately and therefore he could get recognition. So my father and my mother both left for England in 1947. So June or July of 1947 was when he left the Tata Institute and rushed to Madras. By September, he was on the boat to England to go to work with M.S. Bartlett in Manchester. And it was starting from September that the Tata Institute moved out of Kenilworth to the old Yacht Club in Bombay. So my father was never in the Yacht Club, he was only in Kenilworth, the very first origins of the Tata Institute. Anyway, on the way to England on the boat, he significantly extended the scope of his method to higher dimensions. So when he arrived in Manchester, he gave a manuscript to Professor Bartlett, and Professor Bartlett and told the story, and Professor Bartlett looked through this and said, this is a perfectly correct technique. There is no reason why Baba should not have recognized this. But he wanted an endorsement. And he had a very brilliant student, former student, who at that time was in Oxford University as on the faculty, D.G. Kendall, who had worked on the two-dimensional version of my father's work, but my father had done multidimensional. So he sent a manuscript from Manchester to Oxford, and promptly within a week, Professor Kendall said, this is absolutely correct, first rate, and should be published. Consequently, Professor Bartlett communicated the paper to the proceedings of the Cambridge Philosophical Society. So I want you to get an idea of the time scale here. I've always wondered, and I've talked to my father about this. So my father's paper, communicated by M.S. Bartlett, appeared in the proceedings of the Cambridge Philosophical Society in March or something of 1950. Now Baba was a fellow of the Royal Society. One of the privileges of being a fellow of the Royal Society is you can communicate your paper directly to the proceedings of the Royal Society without going through the long refereeing process. So you would think, and that's what my father was afraid of, Baba's paper would appear immediately in the proceedings of the Royal Society. But as fate would have it, or as providence would have it, because the method of Baba was long, in the process of writing it, they found the paper needed revision. And the revision caused a mild delay. So Baba's paper appeared in the proceedings of the Royal Society at the same time as my father's paper appeared in the proceedings of the Cambridge Philosophical Society. So once again, this providence actually played a role. So the two papers appeared, if not written as joint authorship, simultaneously and independently. So today, those equations are known as the Baba-Ramakrishnan equations, and that's how they should have been known from day one in a joint paper. So this is really what happened. So after finishing his PhD in England, my father returned to India in 1951 and very soon was appointed as a reader in Madras University. So I'll show you a picture of Madras University here. At that time, G.N. Ramachandran, whose picture you just showed, was the professor of the newly formed physics department of Madras University, and he had not yet joined. So technically, my father joined the department a few months before GNR actually came and joined, but GNR was already known to be the head of that department. So they were together starting physics. GNR in crystallography and related areas, my father in theoretical physics and applications of probability. So he worked there, and at that time he also became very close to Sir C.V. Raman. By the by, in 1943, I told you he listened to this lecture of Homi Bhabha, and before taking to law, he still had this thing, maybe I should take to science. So he went and consulted Sir C.V. Raman. My father went and consulted Sir C.V. Raman. But Sir C.V. Raman made very pessimistic remarks about the future of science in India and the future for a young scientist. Nothing against my father. He basically gave a very bleak view of the future And so basically scared away my father, and there my grandfather was saying, take to law, and I have this big practice. It's given, it's right in front of you. So that happened. But now, after my father received his PhD and came back to India, Raman was all praise for my father. So he invited him to give talks in the Indian Academy of Sciences and said, you know, this is wonderful work, I appreciate originality, and so on and so forth. So my father and Sir C.V. Raman became very close. So close that in 1954, on hearing my father give a lecture, Raman said, I want you to become a fellow of the Indian Academy of Sciences. So he had only come back in 1951-52. So in 54, with the support of Sir C.V. Raman and the nomination letter coming from G.N. Ramachandran, my father was elected fellow of the Indian Academy of Sciences right at the start of his career. That was the amount of support that Sir C.V. Raman gave. In fact, I have a letter, which unfortunately I don't have a scan of here, but it is going to come in the publication of the Alladi diary very soon, in 2018, where Raman says, we want Indian candidates for the Nobel Prize. How about G.N. Ramachandran and you as possible candidates? There is a letter from Raman. So that was the amount of at least admiration and hope that Raman had for my father at that time. So this was 1954. So things were going on like this at Madras University. So the next thing that happens is a visit to Australia at the invitation of one Professor Harry Messel, who was starting a department in physics department in Sydney, a person my father had contacted in England. By the by, during the 2 years that my father spent in England, he attended many important conferences. In particular, there was a conference that he attended in which he met Heisenberg, Max Born, and Niels Bohr, and interacted with them on very fundamental problems in physics. And that early contact actually helped him continue with his research in India. So these names will all come back later. But what actually happened, one of the turning points in his career was a round-the-world trip that he made in 1956. So I'm going to go immediately to 1956. But perhaps before I go to 1956, I should mention the first 3 visitors who came to the theoretical physics seminar to Srinivas. One was Paul Dirac. Dirac was the first visitor to the newly formed physics department of the University of Madras. Can you get a more distinguished visitor than Dirac? So he was on a sabbatical and he was touring India, and he had to visit the Tata Institute. My father found out that Dirac was going to be in India for a few weeks, invited him, and he came to Madras. So Dirac was our house guest. He and his wife stayed in the upstairs of Srinivas. Now Dirac liked hot, spicy food, but Mrs. Dirac would not accept any spice. So at Srinivas, my father said we had offered food to them, karam and no karam. So 2 types of Indian food were offered, and the Diracs were extremely happy. And of course Dirac gave beautiful lecture at Madras University, and my father in his enthusiasm was introducing Dirac to everyone, and Dirac called him aside and said, don't do that. I mean, there's only a certain number of hands I can shake. I can't be introduced to everyone. I know you are having great enthusiasm here, but you should control this, and I'm a physics professor, I'll give my lecture and I leave. But anyway, Dirac was the first visitor. Another visitor was C.F. Powell, also a Nobel laureate. And for those visitors who couldn't stay with us, they were accommodated either at the Woodlands or the Dasha Prakash. I'm just giving you some ideas about, because Madras heritage. And if they wanted a British style hotel, either the Connemara or the Oceanic. Oceanic doesn't exist and the Dasha Prakash doesn't exist, but these are the hotels where people stayed. And then the third visitor was Sir Mark Oliphant, who was a student of Lord Ernest Rutherford, who my father met in Australia and convinced Oliphant to come to Madras and give the Rutherford Memorial Lecture. I want to give you a little episode about Oliphant. Oliphant came to Madras, and my father always had these contacts with the Hindu. So he gave the contents of a certain lecture to the Hindu. And the Hindu published that lecture in full, and that afternoon he was supposed to give that lecture in Bangalore. So when Raman received him in Bangalore, Raman said, I have already read this lecture, so you need to talk about a different topic. So that was how demanding Saraswati V. Raman was. So it's not easy to talk in the presence of Saraswati V. Raman, but anyway, I think Oliphant managed this. So these were the first 3 visitors to the physics department at the Madras. Okay, Paul Dirac, C.F. Powell, and Sir Mark Oliphant. So that's the level of visitors that they had. So the theoretical physics seminar had not yet started, but my father had students. His first 2 students were P.M. Matthews, who later became the head of the theoretical physics department of the University of Madras, and S.K. Srinivasan, who became the head of the mathematics department at IIT. So these were the first 2 students. In 1956, he went on a round-the-world tour. And this tour was, in my opinion, among all his foreign travels, the most significant in his whole life, because many, many amazing things happened. The first was a visit to Yukawa Hall. This is the institute that Japan had created for Hideki Yukawa, who had won the Nobel Prize for the prediction, I think, of the pi meson, if I'm not correct. We have a physicist in the audience. And so Hideki Yukawa got the Nobel Prize. It was 2 weeks at Yukawa Hall, and it was a fantastic experience for my father. So I want to read from the diary, because that kind of English I cannot match. So he says, in the domestic environment of the Yukawa Hall, young Japanese physicists, the hope and pride of their country, just resurrected from the Second World War, gathered together in enlightened leisure to discuss the most abstruse problems of modern physics. That strange enchantment drew me into the domain of elementary particle physics, and I played with the idea of creating something like the Yukawa Hall in my own hometown, where my great father had made his legendary reputation in another field of intellectual activity. So Yukawa Hall had a big impression on my father. So that was the first major stop. Then from Yukawa Hall, he moved on to the United States. And in the United States, he first met Richard Bellman of the RAND Corporation, with whom he had a lot of correspondence and collaboration. But most importantly, he went to a conference on high energy physics in Rochester, organized by Robert Marshak. So this, oh, by the way, one other thing I will tell you. When he was in Los Angeles visiting Richard Bellman, Bellman asked him, what is it that you would like to do in Los Angeles? And my father said, I want to meet Richard Feynman at Caltech. So he never wasted any time. So Bellman picked up the phone, called Richard Feynman, and Feynman said, all right, I'll meet Ramakrishnan. So Ramakrishnan goes to meet Feynman in Caltech, and Feynman is sitting there with his legs on top of the table, looking at the blackboard and thinking about something. My father is knocking on the door, and with characteristic Indian humility, he says, is this Professor Feynman? And immediately Feynman is informal, very informal. He says, cut it out, come on in. So he doesn't want all this Professor Feynman and bending and talking to him. You know, we are equals, we are physicists. So my father goes to talk to Feynman, and he tells Feynman, I want to know your model which explains how the electron travels back in time. And Feynman gave a personal 1-hour lecture to my father on how the electron travels back in time in Caltech, in his office. And later my father actually found an alternate way of viewing the Feynman diagrams. But what I'm trying to tell you is, you have to listen to the greats in their own words, in their own papers. Now Gopu was talking about finding out how some of these great people had actually struggled. So my father always has said, you must read the original papers, not somebody else's description of Feynman's work or somebody else's description of Einstein. Read Einstein's papers, you will know his strength and his weakness, meaning where he struggled, and maybe you can do something else which overcomes that struggle. So that's what happened to Feynman. But anyway, He went to Rochester for this conference, and that completely changed his view of physics. Until then, he was working on cosmic radiation and stochastic processes. But after meeting various physicists at this conference in high energy physics, he decided that it was time to move to elementary particle physics. So I'll again read from the diary. I went to the University of Rochester to attend a high energy physics conference for 4 days. The entire panorama of high energy physics unfolded in a flash. The conference had a terrific impact on me, who until then was a complacent votary of British mathematical institutions. I found that the center of gravity of creative science had shifted from Europe to the United States. The affluence and academic freedom of an American university campus was attracting even the most nationalistic scientists from Europe for permanent residence in the USA. Besides, a new brand of American scientists had gained leadership in the mathematical sciences. Gell-Mann, Goldberger, Feynman, Chu were all there at the conference organized by Marshak, the architect of the Rochester conferences, which was held later at various centers of the world. So this completely transformed his view of the subject, and he wanted to move into theoretical physics. Again, an incredible event happened. He is not an expert on physics, so at lunchtime, he went and sat in a corner because he was shy to sit amongst the great physicists. Robert Oppenheimer, who was at this conference, who was at that time the director of the Institute for Advanced Study and who was the maker of the atom bomb, he is carrying his plate. It's a buffet, so you go there, take your food, and then you go and sit at a table and talk to physicists. He finds my father sitting in a corner by himself. So he comes to my father and says, "May I join you?" This is Robert Oppenheimer saying. And so my father said, "Of course, I'm honored." So Oppenheimer and he are talking. So Oppenheimer asks him what he is doing, and my father describes his work, and Oppenheimer is actually quite impressed. So at that time, he asks my father, "What are your future plans?" Again, my father doesn't waste a moment. So he said, "For one, I'd like to visit the Institute for Advanced Study." No application. He just says he wants to visit the Institute for Advanced Study. So Oppenheimer takes his pen, a little pad that he has, writes down my father's name and says, "You will hear from me." That's what Oppenheimer said. And so my father comes back home, and within a few months, there is a handsome invitation from Oppenheimer himself for my father to visit the Institute for Advanced Study starting in the year 1957-58. So again, an incredible event happened. So he didn't go through the grind of sending in applications and doing this. It was really Oppenheimer's action. So let me go on to 1957-58 at the Institute for Advanced. So many other things happened actually in 1956 in that tour, but I will not actually get into that. I'll get to the Institute for Advanced Study, 1957-58. So that was a very exciting year at the Institute. From now on, you'll see more slides coming in. So here he is in front of my father in front of Fuld Hall at the Institute for Advanced Study. There at the Institute were two young Chinese physicists, T.D. Lee and C.N. Yang. And they had done very fundamental work. And there was talk at the Institute when they will get the Nobel Prize. And they got the Nobel Prize that year. So sometimes you got to wait for many years to get the Nobel Prize. But for Lee and Yang, it was a very quick recognition for them to get the Nobel Prize. So there was a lot of excitement. And Oppenheimer was giving seminars and was in seminars. And my father says the very presence of Oppenheimer gave a spirit to the seminar. So I'm going to read to you what my father had written about Oppenheimer. My first meeting with Oppenheimer fulfilled my expectations about this legendary figure who dominated not only American science, but influenced the destiny of the world as the architect of the atom bomb. Lean and of medium height, he had an oval head, prominent cheekbones, and piercing eyes. He could pick his men by lighting his pipe, each for the appointed task, according to his talent and inclination, from a Nobel Prizeman to a truck driver. He was magnanimous in providing opportunities for young scientists and enjoyed discussions at every seminar where his very presence invited impartial criticism. His intellectual interests ranged from theoretical physics to Hindu philosophy. And in Rabbi's estimate, he understood the whole structure of physics with absolute clarity. It was said that he had two passions, physics and the desert. He found one in the other when at the age of 40, he was called upon to undertake at Los Alamos a task unprecedented in its objective, undefined in its scope, unpredictable in its consequences, the creation of the atom bomb. So desert and physics combined. And he goes on. So his description of Oppenheimer is something that has to be actually published. And it is published in the diary, but should be even better known. So at the institute, he heard 100 lectures of Lee and Yang and Stromgren and various people, and he decided to move into elementary particle physics. So he came to Madras in 1957, and he said, I have to start a seminar. So he had more students coming in here. I have a good friend in the audience, Mr. Venugopalan, and we have a common friend, V.K. Vishwanathan, who joined my father as a student in June of 1958. But interestingly, he comes back from the Institute for Advanced Study in 58, and that year, Krishnaswamy Mudaliyar, the great Vice Chancellor of Madras University, who ruled for 27 years with an iron hand, decides to create an extension center in Madurai. And my father was asked to go and start the physics department in Madurai. So my father says in the diary, for all this that I have learnt in Princeton, I come back and I want to start something in Madras in the Princeton spirit. The gift that I get from the University of Madras is that I am banished to Madurai, to this university which has neither shape nor form, no library, nothing, and I am asked to start a physics department there, along with Professor Shantappa, who was to start chemistry, and M. Venkatraman, who was to start mathematics. Venkatraman stayed back in Madurai and became the head of the mathematics department. Shantappa, after a few years, came to Madras and, of course, became later the Vice Chancellor of the University of Madras. So anyway, these were the three who were sent. But now, my father had to have an excuse to come to Madras and conduct these seminars. So what actually happened was, there was a Hindi commission, how to convert these terms into Hindi, scientific terms into Hindi. My father never knew any Hindi, but he accepted this assignment because that will give him opportunity to go to Delhi. And that opportunity he will be used by coming to Madras. And every time he will stay in Madras for a few days, and he continued to conduct the theoretical physics seminar in Madras. He continued to meet with students here in Madras on those visits. Some students, of course, went to Madurai. So one of the students is right here, Professor Devanathan, who later rose to the position as the head of the nuclear physics department of the University of Madras. So he was one of those who was trained during that period. And we're going to see a picture of Professor Devanathan. Let me give you another picture of the Institute for Advanced Study of the actual building where my father had his office. So that's, if you see father standing in front of his office, a building at the Institute for Advanced Study. So anyway, so these lectures were being conducted, and by that time, his reputation as a teacher had grown so much, some of the best students of the MSc used to come and join him at the theoretical physics seminar. So this had actually become quite a good setup in Madras. So we're going to move on to, so in 1959 was when the theoretical physics seminar was formally christened. And Professor Devanathan, at that time Mr. Devanathan, was made the secretary of the theoretical physics seminar. And my father has said in his diary, he was such a genial person that we felt that he would play, and so organized that he would play the perfect role as the secretary of the theoretical physics seminar. So this is the year 1959, and at that time was the visit of, he had an opportunity to meet C. Subramaniam. So I'm going to get to C. Subramaniam very So C. Subramaniam at that time was the Minister for Education and Finance of Madras. And he was giving a talk at the Woodlands Hotel for a meeting of the African Students Association. And my father was invited to this get-together at the Woodlands. My father felt, Subramaniam is another politician, what is he going to know about science? I'm not interested in meeting Subramaniam, so he didn't respond to that invitation. But that evening, they were going, my father and my mother were going to the Madras beach just to relax. So my mother looked at my father and said, all said and done, you have been invited. It is rude not to respond to the invitation. So let us at least go to the Woodlands for a few minutes. So as the car is going to the Madras beach, at my mother's insistence, my father attends this meeting. So there is my father, Subramaniam, speaking. My father is sitting there. They actually make him sit at the head table, and there's my mother next to him. So it is my mother's insistence he goes and attends this meeting where Subramaniam is speaking. Now at that meeting, one of the question answer, after Subramaniam talks, one of the members of the audience says, you are talking about prejudice, how the British look down upon Indians. Here in India, I find that most Indians are looking down upon us, black Africans. How do you explain this? And Subramaniam couldn't answer this very frankly. He's a politician, so he has to do this very carefully. So my father says, I will address your question. So his response was, the only way to fight prejudice is with quality work. If you go on saying that you are being ignored, that by itself is not going to get recognition. Prove that you are worthwhile, and using that worth, try to get your recognition. Europe was the center of science, but America, by sheer worth, shifted the center of gravity to the United States. I've just come back from the Institute for Advanced Study. Europe is no longer the center. It is the United States which is the center. When my father, Sir Alladi, wanted to start the profession here, he was a Telugu man and he was not allowed. The people were not thinking that he was going to make great strides in a group dominated by lawyers coming from the Kaveri region. But out of sheer competence, the lawyers of the Kaveri region became his apprentices. So he was not complaining. He knew that this, not prejudice, this viewpoint was there, but you have to show it by hard work and competence. So Subramaniam was very much impressed with this speech of my father and said, why don't you meet me at the Kuam house? So my father met Subramaniam at the Kuam house, and when Subramaniam asked him, what is this thing about the Institute for Advanced Study? He said, I've just come back, sir. I'm conducting a theoretical physics seminar and I want to completely do a radical transformation of physics in Madras. So my father invited Subramaniam to meet the members of the theoretical physics seminar. So I'm going to show you next pictures of C. Subramaniam with the members of the theoretical physics seminar. So here is Subramaniam at Ekam Srinivas on the left with my father, and then various members of the seminar. I'm just going to have some more pictures. So he spent a relaxed evening at Ekam Srinivas. He was not a typical politician. He was one who was very passionate. And so my father's view of C. Subramaniam changed completely. Okay? I'm going to show some pictures of Subramaniam. Not only did Subramaniam spend that relaxed evening, he was later a regular visitor to Ekam Srinivas when other visitors came. So here we see some of the ladies. My father had 4 lady students, and you actually see them all here. And Subramaniam was quite impressed with this gathering, with this group at Madras. But still, something had to happen. But there was continuing a steady stream of visitors to Madras, and I'm going to show you one visitor, also because Professor Devanathan is here. This is Professor A.M. Lane. Every time visitors came, you have to have excursions. So a regular excursion was to Mahabalipuram. So here is Professor Devanathan, who I think has not aged since then. So he is the ageless Devanathan. You look at him now and you look at the picture, he is the same. He is with A.M. Lane at Mahabalipuram. So all these people not only gave talks at the theoretical physics seminar, they used to be taken on excursions in Madras. And as usual, cars would give trouble. So our Hillman car has been temporarily stopped, but what happens is at that time you give them tender coconuts while he is fixing the car. So whatever be the thing, all these visitors were entertained in Madras. But now I have to come to a specific visitor, two visitors who completely changed the scene. The Indian Science Congress was taking place in 1960 in Bombay. And one of the distinguished visitors to the Indian Science Congress was Abdul Salam, January 1960. And my father had heard of Abdul Salam, who was one of the youngest fellows of the Royal Society. So my father invited Salam to Ekamranivas and to be his personal guest. And Salam graciously accepted the invitation. So here is young Abdul Salam lecturing at the theoretical physics seminar upstairs. Now Salam gave a 2-hour lecture, and they all took this formally. This is not a lecture in a university. This is a lecture at a person's home, and he is still in a full suit. So he took this talk very seriously, and here are all the students of the seminar. Now Salam and my father had such great regard for each other that my father presented to Abdul Salam a portrait of Lord Krishna, which Abdul Salam accepted with grace. And in return, my father attended namaz with Abdul Salam in a mosque. So religion was not a barrier for either their friendship or for their scientific discussions. Okay, so they were very great friends. So here is Abdul Salam at Ekamranivas, and so this was a fantastic visit, and I'll come to Salam in a moment, and I will tell you something about Indian science in connection with Salam. So that was one major visitor to Ekamranivas. Immediately after Salam was the visit of Niels Bohr, also in January of 1960. Niels Bohr, of course, was the legend of modern physics, the Bohr atom, was the unquestioned leader. He came to Madras as the guest of Prime Minister Nehru. So he was staying at the Raj Bhavan. As I told you, my father had met Niels Bohr at a conference in England when he was a PhD student in Manchester. So he had contact with Niels Bohr. So he invited Niels Bohr to his house, to Ekamranivas, to meet the students of the theoretical physics seminar. So Niels Bohr came to Ekamranivas, and he was accompanied by a representative of the government who was always with Niels Bohr. So I'm going to show you a picture of Niels Bohr. I think I have the picture here. Maybe I don't. But anyway, here is a dinner for Niels Bohr at Ekamranivas. And as you can see, it's all a traditional Indian dinner. I was with my dad all the time. So here is me with Niels Bohr. So my early contact with eminent physicists. And Niels Bohr was engrossed in conversation with the students of the seminar, and it was getting late. So this representative of the government was reminding Niels Bohr that we should get back to the Raj Bhavan, but Niels Bohr said, no, don't worry, I want to be here with Alladi and his group. And the joke is that since Niels Bohr would smoke a pipe, he would sometimes put a burning pipe into his pocket without, in his absent-mindedness, and Mrs. Bohr had to keep a watchful eye on Niels Bohr to make sure that that didn't happen. So there's Mrs. Bohr in conversation with my mother, but at the same time, I think in the corner of her eye, she is probably watching her husband to make sure that the pipe is not inadvertently put into the pocket. So one of the most famous pictures of my father with Niels Bohr is this picture, and I want to emphasize the importance of this picture. My father is in his dhoti. He is not changing into an English dress, a Western dress, simply because Niels Bohr is there. He was proud to be an Indian, and he wore his dhoti and shirt and welcomed Niels Bohr to Ekamra Nivas. I just wanted to tell you how deeply rooted in terms of Indian traditions he was. So this is Niels Bohr at Ekamra Nivas. Now what happens is, so this is January 1960. So Niels Bohr is then having a press conference, and at press conference Niels Bohr is asked, what is it that impressed you the most on your visit to India? And that's when he said two things: the massive setup of the Tata Institute in Bombay and a small group of students trained by Alladi Ramakrishnan in Madras. Now I want you I want to tell you the example that my father gave. He said, this is like Rukmini and Satyabhama, where there is a pot of gold on one side on the balance and Rukmini's Tulasi on the other. The Tulasi balances that pot of gold. So there was a Upama Kalidasasya. I'm a student of Sanskrit. So my father had a reason to give this example. The massive setup of the Tata Institute is something with an enormous amount of money. But he compared that to Satyabhama. He compared himself to Rukmini. That's because I think in his back of his mind he was disappointed at the fact that this TFR and Baba did not recognize him. But he said, my Tulasi is just as good as this pot of gold on the other side. So that's the example he has given in his diary. That was exactly what happened. So anyway, so Jawaharlal Nehru said, I know the great Sir Alladi, but who is this Alladi Ramakrishnan? So he was later told by C. Subramaniam, this is the son of Sir Alladi who is conducting this seminar in Madras. But still, things had to happen before this thing could bear fruit. So what happened at that time was, my father had a visit to Europe in 1960, and in that visit he actually went to Niels Bohr's residence, which is like Ekamra Nivas. So here is my father with Niels Bohr in Bohr's residence in Copenhagen in the summer of 1960. And he visited various centers at that time, all relating to his work, major publications and so on. So he told the Vice Chancellor that he can take it no more in Madurai. And the Vice Chancellor said, okay, after you finish your tour, which is summer of 1960, when you come back, when the new term begins, you can come back to Madras. So the Madurai assignment ended in the summer of 1960, at the end of summer of 1960. So when he came back to Madras, my father was once again brought back to the University of Madras. But something interesting, there was no office space for him. So he had a room. He had to lecture in the German department. So he was a professor without portfolio, care of the German department. That's exactly how the letter reads. You have no portfolio right now, so all communication to you can come care of the German department. Exactly what happened at the University of Madras. But he continued. He continued his lectures at Ekamra Nivas and visitors galore. That was going on. So I'm going to just show you a few visitors who came at that time. So we are going to proceed directly to 1961. At that time, the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research was conducting a conference in Bangalore, a summer school in Bangalore. And for that summer school, Murray Gell-Mann, not yet a Nobel laureate, but already recognized as a hotshot in physics, and Richard Dalitz of the University of Chicago were the main lecturers at that conference. And my father was invited by Homi Baba, and he went with, I think, 6 of his students or 8 of his students to that conference, including his 4 female students. So here is a picture of Murray Gell-Mann with Homi Baba, not in Bangalore but in Nandi Hills. And who took this picture? I took this picture. I went on that excursion and I snapped a picture of my father with Homi Baba and others at that conference. So that was my first meeting with Homi Baba, and you have to believe that I'm actually there. So these are the 4 girl students. I think this is at Krishna Rajasagar. And That's me. So I'm with him on that trip. Okay, so my father then asked Gelman and Dalits to come to Ekamra Nivas and to come home. So Gelman and Dalits spent 2 nights at Ekamra Nivas and met with the students. So I'll show you a picture of Gelman and Dalits at Ekamra Nivas. So that's Gelman and Dalits with my father. My father says, when speaking to Dalits, Dalits said, Gelman is striding the world like a colossus. I feel maybe I shouldn't even do any research. This is Dalits. And my father said, I don't accept that viewpoint. One has to be bold enough to even make modifications to the theories of the masters, because otherwise you cannot yourself do fundamental work. Dalits did fundamental work, but that just showed his modesty. And years later, of course, my father improved and generalized the Gelman-Nishijima relation. So this is a picture of Murray Gelman. I have to show you a picture of Murray Gelman with my mother. And I like this picture very much because years later, Gelman came to the University of Florida to a 60th birthday conference of a Professor Raman of the physics department, who is my father's grand student of A.P. Balachandra, who was my father's student. So I was invited to this conference by Professor Raman. I was chair of mathematics at that time. So I told Professor Gelman, I said, I remember your visit, my visit to your home in 1962 with my father. And he said, I remember the visit to your home, Ekamra Nivas, and in particular, the magnificent saris that your mother wore and the hospitality of your parents. So I was very pleased when he told me this at the University of Florida. So Gelman's visit, I think, inspired the students of the theoretical physics seminar to get into much greater problems in modern physics. But still, it was just the theoretical physics seminar going on. There were more visitors, and I'm going to give you one more Nobel laureate who visited Ekamra Nivas. Oh, by the way, this is a very beautiful picture of Murray Gelman at the lighthouse at Mahabalipuram. So they were all taken, given the standard thing, and there seated next to Gelman, you see a sort of a local guy. So anyway, so that's Gelman. So the next great visitor to Ekamra Nivas was Donald Glaser, the discoverer of the bubble chamber. The one, he got a Nobel Prize for his discovery of the bubble chamber. So this is Don Glaser lecturing at Ekamra Nivas and various members of the theoretical physics seminar. There you see Professor Devanathan, but I'm going to give you a picture of Devanathan actually standing. He is here in the audience, so I should show a picture of him standing. Okay, there he is explaining his work to Don Glaser. So my father made his students go to the board and present their work to the Nobel laureates. Okay, if you can't survive that, don't do a PhD in physics with me. That is basically the thing. So here is young Devanathan explaining his work to Don Glaser. And so this was 1961, okay? But still, things were not happening too much, so I have to go to one other visitor who played a very major role. This was Professor Morris Shapiro. What happened when Shapiro visited Madras was, my father made him meet C. Subramaniam. And Shapiro said, watching the students gather around Alladi Ramakrishnan reminded him of the students who gathered around Oppenheimer at Los Alamos. See, he gave that comparison. And therefore, he told Subramaniam, it is time that the Prime Minister meets this group of students. So it was Shapiro who gave that analogy. Watching the students around Alladi Ramakrishnan is like me watching, and Shapiro was at Los Alamos, how we gathered around Oppenheimer at Los Alamos. So somebody had to say things like this, right? It's one thing to sort of thank you, excellent hospitality, and leave, but you got to say it to the right people. So Shapiro said this to C. Subramaniam. So here is Shapiro at the roof garden of Dasha Prakash Hotel talking to the students. So C. Subramaniam writes to Jawaharlal Nehru, and Nehru responds and says, I will meet Alladi and the students of the theoretical physics seminar on October 8th, 1961. That was the great day, and at the Raj Bhavan. Please ask Alladi and his wife Lalita to have dinner with me. After the dinner, I will meet all the students. So I'm going to show you a picture of Jawaharlal Nehru. No, sorry, this is Macria Hazlitt. I'm trying to see the... Oh, just a second, close. I'll show you a picture of Jawaharlal Nehru here. One second. I got to get that picture of Nehru. It's here somewhere. Here. So there is Nehru. This is at the Raj Bhavan. My father is there. C. Subramaniam. There you see Devanathan and all other students. And this is after the dinner. So following that conversation, Nehru asks my father, what is it that you want? I met your students. What is it that you want? So this is an advice my father has given me, although I have never had such an occasion. He says, when a great person asks you a question, what is it you want? Never ask for something meager. Don't ask for a salary raise. Don't say your lab needs more money. So my father said, I want a new institute, like the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. And Jawaharlal Nehru said, okay, I'll think about it. Why don't you send a proposal? So my father sends a proposal to Jawaharlal Nehru through C. Subramaniam. And there is a period of 1 month of waiting. Now, the seminar must go on. So I'm going to tell you a little bit as to what happened during that 1 month of waiting. So I have to give you a little bit about the visitors who came to Ekamranivas during that 1 month. One of the persons was Sir James Lighthill, who my father had met in Manchester. He was the director of the Royal Aircraft Establishment in Farnborough, and Subramaniam was always invited to dinner when these eminent visitors came. But one other person that the Tamil Heritage Foundation will be very happy to learn about is Subramaniam Chandrasekhar. And I chose this picture specially for the Tamil Heritage Foundation. So Subramaniam Chandrasekhar was visiting Madras during November, December of 1961. And my father said, sir, you have to come and give a lecture at Ekamranivas. By the way, in the 1950s, Chandrasekhar had communicated 7 papers of my father to the Astrophysical Journal, some in collaboration with his students. So he knew Chandrasekhar. Chandrasekhar was the editor of the Astrophysical Journal. And so Chandrasekhar said, jocularly, I will come to your house on one condition. I have to be treated to a sit-down South Indian traditional plantain leaf dinner, which was the easiest to arrange in Ekamranivas. So Chandrasekhar comes in a full suit, as he always does, gave his 2-hour lecture, changed into a dhoti, and here he is sitting, that's Subramaniam Chandrasekhar, sitting next to my father and enjoying a South Indian plantain leaf dinner. What about the ladies? Well, I have to show you the next picture. So that's Mrs. Chandrasekhar with my mother. So that's Mrs. Chandrasekhar with my mother and the girl students of the theoretical physics seminar. So this was happening in November. But now, what about MatScience? So during this 1 month, the proposal goes to Delhi. But before Jawaharlal Nehru could endorse the proposal, he wants the opinion of Homi Bhabha, who was the director of the Tata Institute and the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission. And Bhabha responds saying, and this is actually described by Subramaniam in his autobiography, The Hand of Destiny. You can read that. Due to lack of time, I'm not reading the whole passage, but it's there in this article which I'm going to go for. I'm giving you a 40-page article which you can read in leisure. Bhabha responds to Nehru saying, this is an interesting proposal, but India cannot afford to have its valuable resources dissipated. The Tata Institute must first be supported, and I don't think there is reason to start other institutes until we really get the Tata Institute going. So we don't need other institutes. So he was not in favor of my father's proposal. C. Subramaniam says, no, I agree with Alladi Ramakrishnan's statement that in the spirit of the United States we need competition. And India is a big enough country. We need something in South India, and therefore we need to have an institute of the type that he proposes. So Nehru gives the nod. But then you can't go against Baba. So Subramaniam says to Jawaharlal Nehru, you should be the patron of the institute. And he turns to Homi Baba in that meeting and says, we want you to be on the board of governors of the MatScience Institute. And Baba agrees. So that happened in early December. So Subramaniam arrives at Madras airport. My father is anxious, goes to meet Subramaniam there. And as he is getting down from the plane, he waves to my father and says, it's all done. Don't worry, the institute is starting. So this was early December, and the institute was inaugurated on January 3rd. So in that short span of time. Now what happens? You need someone to inaugurate the institute. Subramaniam Chandrasekhar was already at the institute in Madras. So my father goes to Chandrasekhar and says, I want you to inaugurate the institute. He did not believe in having some politician come and do it. He wanted an academic. And he told Subramaniam Chandrasekhar, you are one of the most eminent astrophysicists in the world. We want you to inaugurate MatScience. So here is a picture of, and my father wanted the inauguration to be at the old English lecture hall of the Presidency College. Regardless of whether Madras University treated him well or not, he said, I am going to have this institute inaugurated in the very place which failed to recognize me. We'll have it in the English lecture hall of the Presidency College. So I'm showing a picture of Madras University and Presidency College. So I'll show a picture of Chandrasekhar, C. Subramaniam, and my father walking to the podium for the inauguration. So that's young Subramaniam Chandrasekhar. And here is my father giving his speech. It is perhaps the finest speech he gave in his life. And at a memorial function that was held after my father died at the Madras, the Presidency College, Justice Mohan said, this speech is so good, it must be given as a standard example of fine English prose in our schools. So that speech is attached to this article and that I'm going to give you. So here is my father giving the speech called The Miracle Has Happened. And I'm also going to show you a couple of pictures of, more pictures of C. Subramaniam speaking and a picture of Subramaniam Chandrasekhar speaking. And the very first lecture at MatScience was by, soon after the inauguration, was by Chandrasekhar on stellar structure. So that took place in the Presidency College. So it's all January 3rd, 1962. And here is a cross-section of the audience. And I think you see Subrai Iyer sitting in the front row and my uncle, Alladi Kupuswamy, who drafted the constitution of MatScience. Everything was done very simple. It's not anything elaborate. But I will fail if I do not show a picture of my father's loyal personal assistant, Nabi Iyengar. So I've got to show that because he physically typed all the letters. Let me see if I can get that picture. There he is. 100 letters were typed. No copying like we do now, physical typing, and sent to scientists on December 22nd, because that was the day, on Ramanujan's birthday, my father received the appointment order of MatScience. Telegrams came back within a week. That's how quickly the letters were sent. Postal service was very efficient. I published a book by Springer Verlag 2 years after my father died, The Legacy of Alladi Ramakrishnan in the Mathematical Sciences, with the great C.R. Rao. And these telegrams received for the inauguration of MatScience are reproduced here. From Niels Bohr, Abdul Salam, Werner Heisenberg, Li and Yang. So if you have time, just spend a few minutes and go through this book. So these telegrams are all reproduced. And Nabi Iyengar was one who physically typed all these letters. So that's how MatScience was inaugurated on January 3rd, 1962. I think this is a story which should be even better known in the city of Madras. And I'm glad that Gopu and the Tamil Heritage Trust invited me to give this talk. The size of the audience is not important. This is still a good audience. The fact the hall is full is not full is not so important to me. Subramaniam Chandrasekhar was known to drive 2 hours to give lectures in a class which had only 2 students. And the 2 students were Li and Yang, and both won the Nobel Prize. So my father has always said, never look at the size of the audience. The audience must be keen and they must carry the message. So I'm hoping that you will transmit this message of the creation of MatScience to people whom you meet. And I'm trying to get this published. And some people who read this are a little bit nervous that I have said some frank things about Homi Baba. But I praised Homi Baba here. But the fact that Baba did not recognize Ramakrishnan's work is a fact that has to be mentioned. And that initially there was resistance from TIFR is also a fact. We cannot be afraid to speak the truth. And the MatScience story is really a series of incredible events that came together in rapid succession. But finally, my father's effort won, but the obstacles that he had to face are absolutely amazing. So I wanted to share this with you, and I think this is the right audience to share this story, because you're all proud of the heritage of the Tamils, and so this is one of the things of which you can be the most proud. Thank you very much.
Anybody, any questions?
Yes.
So in those times, even now, high energy physics is sort of fairly esoteric. Not many would go for it. Your father, the happenstances of what happened, that was made clear. But how were students? I mean, ipa paakumbodhu Google irukku, you can have, but angana that point of knowledge flow irukla and the subfield la, adum especially one of the most happening fields.
Correct.
Hot bed ah irukkuradhu adu vandu so students eppadi edutundada and idhula.
Perhaps somebody like Devanathan should answer that question, but I will try to answer. From what I know talking to my father, and from what I know talking to the students, it was not just my father giving lectures. That by itself would not be enough. The students themselves had to learn the subject afresh along with my father, and they had to give the seminars themselves. So I showed this picture of Devanathan talking about his research to Glaser, but before that, Devanathan was giving lectures in the theoretical physics. When the theoretical physics seminar was just a meeting between my father and his students, my father probably gave 50% of the lectures, but the other 50% lectures were given by Devanathan, they were given by Balachandran, they were given by T.K. Radha. They were reading and they were learning this together. So my father was open in saying, I also learned the subject along with my students. So it was not one professor just giving a set of lectures. He did give lots of lectures, but after that the students had to get involved, and they did not understand everything. And that was one of the reasons why he brought these leaders, so that they could clear the doubts by talking to the leaders. So they had plenty of doubts, and there is nothing wrong in having doubts as long as you know that you don't understand something. The worst thing is thinking you understand something when you don't understand. But if you clearly know that you don't understand something, you will make the effort to understand. And I think that was really what was going on, and that was the kind of doubts that they cleared when they met these Nobel laureates. And the Nobel laureates were happy to talk to such people because they were frank, they want to learn the subject, and therefore these people spent hours and hours with them talking to them. So Professor Devanathan, I don't know whether you want to say anything, but he's probably a little bit hard of hearing now, but yeah, okay. So this is what I have heard from the students of the seminar when I have had conversations with them. So that's really what was going on. It's not an easy thing to learn a subject afresh. Yes.
It's more a personal question about Mr. Ramakrishnan. What drove him to come back? At that point of time, anybody would have settled down there with better universities, better colleges, better opportunities for themselves. What was the factor that? Was it the family? Was it his culture?
His own upbringing. If you read the Alladi diary, so he has published 2 volumes. And I am editing these 2 volumes to be published by World Scientific next year. Okay? So by editing, what I mean is I'm adding notes, I'm adding an index, I'm cutting off some very personal things, but keeping the scientific part in it. He is very deeply rooted to India in his upbringing. So the thought of settling down in a foreign country never occurred to him. But he was, and that was the way also that my grandfather taught. So he went to England only because he was not recognized by Homi Baba. That is made very clear here. I had to get recognition by people abroad. But as soon as he got his degree, he came back. He wanted to have a job in Madras. He wanted to create this in Madras, regardless of the opposition. So he believed in world travel. He believed in encouraging his students to travel abroad. He never, even at MatScience as a director, he never held back. A student wants to go on 1 year's leave, he'll say, you go. What if he doesn't come back? Science is an international enterprise. If he wants to stay abroad or she wants to stay abroad, they can stay abroad. If you force somebody to come back, they will be eternally unhappy. So he believed that. But in his own case, he believed in being here and traveling regularly, meeting scientists and coming back. So he was very deeply rooted in that in terms of his own culture, his own traditions. In fact, he told me, when I was settling down in the US, he says, you cannot say it won't work in India. I will not accept that. I want you to come back, whether it's MatScience or Raman Institute. You be here. If it doesn't work, you leave. But I don't want you to say before trying that India will not work. So I actually came back and joined MatScience at his insistence. But after his retirement, I don't want to get into details, the situation of MatScience went very bad, and Sudarshan says all these people started clashing, and then I told my father, no, I don't want to get involved in this cross-fighting and so on. I will visit you regularly. So I settled in the United States. But that was my person. And he didn't object, just as he didn't object to his students, some of whom settled in America. But he himself was deeply rooted to India and to Madras.
Can you talk about your own childhood growing up in this enlightening atmosphere and how that contributed to your becoming an academic?
Well, I thought of nothing else but an academic career except for one mild change. So I was constantly meeting these eminent scientists. By the way, I should have also had a picture of Professor Marshall Stone, who is one of the greatest mathematicians. So it was not just physicists who came, it was also mathematicians who visited. So I was traveling with him, so universities and so on. So the academic career was very natural to me. However, I was also passionately interested in aerodynamics. So when we went there, we used to visit Boeing Aircraft Corporation, Douglas Aircraft Corporation, and so on. And my father always used to talk to me about aviation. So on the one hand, I very much wanted to pursue aviation. So my father took me to a professor of aerodynamics at Princeton University, and that person said, you first get a BSc in mathematics. Then you can start learning aerodynamics. So that's why I joined BSc in Vivekananda College, and then one thing led to another, and I became a mathematician. But an academic career was very natural to me because that's all I knew. Okay, so seeing these scientists had a great impression. But it actually had an effect on me in another way. When I became chairman of the University of Florida Mathematics Department, I instituted a series of distinguished lectures because I've seen these Nobel laureates come to and give these talks. So I told the university, not just enough if you do mathematics, we should have something. So I convinced the administration to create this distinguished lecture series, not 1 but 4. And then I created special professorships. And at a recent conference for my 60th birthday, I just have to tell you this because it's really modeled along my father's thing. One of the persons said, Krishna Alladi has put the University of Florida on the world map, mathematics department, because of this steady flow of lectures. And I said that was all, inspired by my father's model here. So all this has an effect on you, what you see when you are growing up.
Something about your father's musical interests?
Yeah, so my father was deeply interested in Carnatic music, but there I have to credit my mother. So in the initial years before marriage, he was not into Carnatic music. My mother comes from a very musically talented and musically oriented family. She and all her sisters sing. Her father was an accomplished veena player. Her mother was an accomplished violinist. Semangudi Srinivas Iyer used to stay in their house, not in their house, but as a tenant when he was Asthana Vidwan in the court of Travancore. So there was music everywhere. So through my mother, my father got interested in Carnatic music. But because of his Telugu background, he got deeply interested in Tyagaraja's music and philosophy. So in later years, independent of my mother, he started delving deep into Tyagaraja's music and used to give lectures on that. So often he used to tell me that the music that is in Tyagaraja and Carnatic has the same level of perfection as in mathematical equations or in symmetries in physics. So he was always into that. Yes?
Yeah. We got a glimpse of the scientific community about 3 decades back. I just want to know, what is the Indian scientific community right now? What is the status of it? The same thing, or it has changed for better?
Okay, so I will give you from my personal experience, and my father's experience and what he has shared with me. There is no question about the fact that India has made great strides in fundamental science, and can be compared to one of the leading nations, any other leading nation in the world. And Baba, I think, brought in atomic physics and atomic energy to this country, and he has to be given all the credit. The one thing which both my father felt and I felt, I also experienced it here, is there is much more central control in India than, for example, in the United States. So here, it is much more difficult to speak frankly with the establishment and to disagree with them and to survive as a consequence of speaking frankly than in the United States. So in the US, I can have a Harvard University professor sit on a committee at the University of Florida and he guides us. He is not coming and dictating terms to us. Whereas I think in India, a few people in these major centers, when they sit on committees, they control the committee. So as long as you are willing to say yes to everything they say in terms of what appointments and so on, then you will survive and then you will be given all the funds. I'm not saying that they won't make good appointments. They do make good appointments. They have very high standards. But perhaps you have high standards also. Maybe you want to make an appointment that they may not want, and maybe your appointment is a good appointment. That kind of feeling that you too can do very good things is not so easily accepted unless you are part of their group or you are trained by that group and so on. So that aspect is there in India, and that was one of the ways in which my father had friction with some of these people, because he would say, we want to do this like the way we want to do it in Madras. Why should we follow another model? And that faced resistance, and that means you don't get the funding that you deserve. I don't think that attitude has changed. But the younger generation of scientists now being appointed in other places, they are getting degrees abroad and coming back. So they think independently. So I think this kind of central control might change or may become minimalized over time. So that's my personal observation.
Maybe an extension of his question and what you answered now. Building institutions of excellence. Inniki, based on your recent travels and your interactions with universities in India, what do you see, is the situation? Where are we? And,
I think we are definitely a world force. There's no question about it, both in terms of theoretical science and in terms of experimental science. And there is no two doubts about that, okay? So we are a world force. It is also wonderful, I think, that they are starting these ICERs and they are starting more IITs, so technological science on the one hand and pure science on the other. And there is a genuine desire to bring scholars from abroad. And instead of talking about brain drain, Subramanian used to say brain bank. So get all those guys and get them involved in uplifting our progress here. And so I think that is happening. So a lot of these things have happened in the last 2 decades. So the old view of how scientific institutions have to develop is now changing. I think there is much more democratization that I see. But in the old days, there were a few great figures, whether it is Raman or whether it is Baba, and they all had their firm views and they controlled. They were great personalities, but they all were controlling figures. That thing is changing, but it will take some time. But I think for the younger generation, definitely, I think there is hope. That I would say that.
So thank you for what I think has been, thank you Dr. Alladi for what I think has been an absolutely wonderful lecture. I think delivered with, he says his father is a greater orator, but I think he did a fantastic job narrating the history, bringing in all the famous personalities, showing all the very human side of it, and giving us a very long, deep view of the events that led up to the creation of institution. Since a little over time, I'll wrap it up fairly quickly. We'll have the next program of the Varaham Era Science Forum. We have a Facebook page and a WhatsApp group, so if you want to just let us know, just connect with us, talk to any of us after the program is over. Write your names in the in the ledger, and then we'll send you email and all that, and you can get in touch with us. Most likely will happen on the third Saturday. Usually we try to have it on the fourth Saturday, but probably because this fourth Saturday a whole bunch of us going to Kanchipuram, so we're going to try to have it on the third Saturday. But we'll let you know what's going on there. We hope to thank you, Professor Devanathan, for coming here and gracing us with your presence. I have to thank mainly Balu sir, because I was taking classes on Sanskrit and a little bit of math with Balu sir, and then he took me to one of these maths lectures, and that's where I got to hear all these lectures. That's not the only one I came to. I came to another lecture also before the Edish one. Yeah. So thank you all for this thing. I'd like to ask Badri Seshadri to give a gift a memento to Professor Alladi. Actually, it's just a humble token of appreciation. Little promotion on this particular thing. It's not an ordinary umbrella, and I'll spread it out just for thing. Since we are going to Kanchi, it's got our Tamil Heritage Trust thing, and more importantly, it's got, and he talked about Upama Kalidasasya. The other person that comes into this thing is Bharave Artha Gauravam, the next line. And Bharavi wrote a poem which says Nagareshu Kanchi, and that's the word we have here in Pallava Grantha. So there you go. So there's a little bit of promotion on that front. So thank you once again. And I think he was as gracious as I think Niels Bohr coming down to Ekamra Nivas, or Richard Feynman saying cut it out, and that kind of thing, to come to this audience. Actually a lot of people complain that we should not have this in this period because of the concerts and the other things, other events there. But thank you all for showing up at such short notice, and thank you, and I'll see you next month. We'll see you all next month. Thank you. Happy New Year.